welcome to another Every Genesis Song Ranked installment. We are today counting up from number 29 to number 20. It does feel quite good to be almost done with the series. We're only going to have 2 videos to go after this one. I do very much appreciate, again, all the comments, thoughts, feedback people have offered. It's very interesting to read. Once I have the number 10 to number 1 video posted, I do plan to go in and maybe do a little bit of offering some thoughts on some of the comments. If you are new to this particular feature, there is a playlist that you can find on the channel that starts from number 179 and goes up from there. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project that seeks to balance accessible but complex songwriting, nuanced emotional content, and kind of a general mood of thoughtful melancholy. Check us out on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. Number 29, I've put Hairless Heart. I do recognize that this is kind of a high ranking for what could be considered a relatively minor piece, particularly with my having put it above some of the historically significant multi-part epics. And I do recognize also that on the level of sheer technique and complexity, this is maybe a less accomplished piece than some of the other instrumentals from this period, or the instrumental sections within some of the larger songs. So because it doesn't have technique or significance on its side, it's hard to make a case for it without resorting to the idea of beauty, which is likely somewhat subjective, not always a very effective basis for argument. I suppose the whole question of the subjective or objective nature of beauty, where that comes from, it's a very, very complex topic that obviously I can't really go into here. But within the 2 minutes or so that this song exists, it presents just an absolutely pure rush of the most unadulterated sweetness, right? Without any of the weirdness or perversity that tends to color the presence of beauty in a lot of the other classic work. Now, obviously, I love weirdness and perversity, but I think there's something about the way that this distills that one particular quality, that one aspect of the experience, into its most pure form. And even after having lived with this album for 20-some years, you know, this is a moment that, when I'm going through it, inevitably every time kind of stops me in my tracks. Inevitably, it makes me hit the back button once or twice, right? This might be, in some literal sense, a 2-minute song, you know, but the urge to replay it is so strong that in practice, when it does come on, it tends to become more like a 6-minute song. So while it doesn't have the heft or technique of some of the longer pieces that I have put it in the ranks of, I just think that there's something significant about the way that it distills the most beautiful aspects of what they do into this just condensed punch of a particular kind of loveliness. Number 28, I've put Duchess. That opening drum machine riff remains one of the most iconic moments in Genesis history, even though it does seem like it took a couple decades for everybody to fully realize it, right? For it to really kind of sink in how iconic that's been. And I've always loved the way that the actual song just kind of erupts out of the sonic miasma of the intro. Once the main song begins, the arrangement really packs a remarkable amount of energy in for something that is technically mid-tempo. There's a way that all of the instrumental parts kind of feel like they're striving and pushing and almost kind of trying to play a little bit faster than the beat, that really, I think, makes a good match with the lyrical theme. Speaking of the lyric, I love the technique there of repeated phrases, repeated sentence structures, which reappear with small but very significant shifts, and the way that the technique of building the story out of those repeated phrases with the shifts mirrors, in fact, the structurally cyclical nature of the music business as illustrated by the rise and fall of the protagonist. Obviously, you know, seems like most people are very fond of this song, but I do feel like it's still a little bit underappreciated how intelligently both the again, the arrangement and the construction of the lyrics are mirroring what's happening both thematically and literally. Bonus points for that rising synth tone coming into the third verse that briefly makes it feel like your head is going to explode. Number 27 is The Return of the Giant Hogweed. There are tons of just absolutely classic details in this song. Of course, that winding, tapping guitar opening, the shuffle that plays underneath it, just an amazing illustration of the skills of both Hackett and Collins. I also love those scampering bass fills during the verse. I had mentioned, I think, the bass fills in Harold the Barrel as well, and it really does drive home how impressive the bass playing is really throughout Nursery Crime, particularly in light of the relatively short length of time that Rutherford had actually been working with that instrument. I love the way the whole arrangement pauses right before the line, "Botanical creature seeks revenge," and the weird, awkward way that Peter emphasizes the wrong syllables in the word botanical. Normally, you would see that as a weakness, but I think the oddity of the emphasis there actually plays into the general mood of the song in a really effective way. I love that creepy kind of stuttering guitar over the piano ostinato. Now, the musical box, of course, is maybe a little bit better known, a little bit better respected. Bits of it endured in the set list for a longer time. But there's a tightness to this piece, a way that each segment flows very naturally into the next, that honestly has always made it feel a bit more effective to me as an overall work, and I am perhaps controversially putting it a bit higher. Of course, we're well into the territory of undiluted greatness now. It's pretty much going to be a string of 10s from here on out, has maybe been for a while. Number 26, I've put The Carpet Crawlers. One thing that Tony's talked about in interviews that I do understand is how the concept of the lamb in certain instances has made it harder for individual songs to stand on their own. I think he used the example of the lamia, which you may notice has not yet appeared in any of these videos. I think this song does, though, somewhat undermine that, right? Because it's been a mainstay of their concerts since the 70s, was in fact, if I'm remembering right, the last thing played at the last show. And the lyric doesn't make any sense at all out of context. It's arguable, in fact, how much sense it makes even within the context of the album. But the melody is so catchy and so moving in its particular way, and the gentle build-up of the arrangement is so irresistible that it succeeds as an individual piece in spite of that fact, right? Probably also a testament to the strengths of both Peter and then later on, particularly Phil, as a singer, that they were able to sell all these lines that, without the context of the album, are basically a string of meaningless words. You could even argue, I think, that this is actually, leaving aside Follow You, Follow Me, this is actually their first truly great pop song, in the sense that it totally bypasses intellectual analysis, succeeds by going straight to the heart. This is, again, probably something that'll be a controversial choice to go as high as it has. It might be that I'm biased a little bit in favor of it because it is something that I came into a new appreciation of relatively late. The reason for that being the 2008 remixes, which are a pretty controversial topic that I've never really dove into here and probably don't want to, frankly. But I do remember listening to the 2008 stereo mix of this album and realizing that I had somehow, after years and years and years with it, had never noticed the bass playing in this song, which, when you do focus on it, is just awesome. It's strikingly intricate, but it's so driving that it never becomes fiddly. It's melodic, it's catchy in its own way, but it's also completely frenetic. Now, I am not a skilled bassist. I'm not as well positioned to evaluate technique as some people, but it really seems to me like you could use this song to put Rutherford among the all-time best rock bassists. This is also maybe the best middle eight in the whole kind of pop-oriented 80s Genesis canon. The shift between the kind of skittery, spidery texture of the verse and then in the midsection into this kind of very stomping four-on-the-floor beat is such an excellent contrast in terms of rhythmic texture. Both of those rhythmic styles achieve drive and achieve tension, but they do it in totally opposite ways. So in terms of the use of smart musicianship to enhance pop songwriting in this era, there are other things like Turn It On Again with its secret odd time signature that get more attention, but I think this is about as good a case as you could make for the way that their continued musical intelligence really underpins even the more straightforward songs. Now, number 24, I've put After the Ordeal, which, like Hairless Heart, I suppose, is a relatively short instrumental piece that gets less attention that I've perhaps controversially put among some longer, more respected works. I don't really know if it's fair to say that the song is underrated or ignored because it does appear on an album that has such legendary status. But like Hairless Heart, it really is one of the most sheerly beautiful things that they've ever done. What I think is particularly interesting about it is it's always struck me as kind of an irony that Tony was against the inclusion of this song on the record, because that kind of lush, rippling piano bed that he does on this piece is a lot of what makes the first half succeed. It's one of the better cases in their whole catalog for Tony as a technician who's elegant but not flashy. It's always seemed to me like a piano line that would have required a fair amount of attention and practice to pull off. So it's really remarkable to me that he could regard it as a throwaway. And that section in the first half, right, with the union of that wonderful classical guitar line that Steve is playing and those kind of, again, the rippling kind of bed of piano melody that Tony does, the way those two things complement each other is really one of the best cases that can be made for how their two skills as players, as arrangers, could complement each other. Number 23, I've put Dance on a Volcano. I don't know if this is the most technical Genesis song. I'm not really even sure how you would analyze that precisely, but it does seem to me like of everything in their whole catalog, this is maybe the single moment where the four instrumentalists feel maybe the most bonded as a playing unit. For years, I appreciated the energy of it. I appreciated the drive of it and the oddity of it. I don't know if I totally understood how fluidly it's jumping around between time signatures until I watched the Rick Beato video analyzing it. And while this is clearly a complicated song, it's also a complicated song whose drive and quirkiness and melodic appeal somehow managed to mask a little bit how really impressive it is as an accomplishment of playing. Number 22, I've put Duke's Travels. One of the defining features of this band's either instrumentals or instrumental sections is they always have the quality of a journey, right? They achieve a sense of traveling from one place to another. Genesis were one of of all the best-known progressive rock bands, they were probably one of the ones that least involved a sense of improvisation, right? Everything that they did was very tightly nailed down, played in a very similar way night after night. Now that has certain disadvantages, of course, but it does reflect, I think, the importance of that sense of travel. They're ultimately a narrative band, right? And the narrative quality of their songs requires a certain amount of discipline in terms of the retention of details from one rendition to another. Now, this is all something that I could say about any number of pieces, but this is one of the pieces which really best lives out that sense of journey. That's as good a rationale as any I can think of for its greatness. Number 21, I've put Turn It On Again. I've been referring to this song so much through the previous 150 or so song reviews that, in a way, it almost feels a little bit redundant to actually have the thing here now. When I think about what makes the best of the more pop-oriented Genesis songs work, It's qualities that I've been over many times by now, right? But particularly the sense of energy and drive and passion, the way in which lyrical darkness and intelligence can kind of sneak in under the cover of something maybe a little bit more accessible, and the way in which an accessible and catchy song can mask really accomplished musicianship that adds subtle levels of complexity. Now, the studio version of this is just an airtight bit of perfection. The live cover medley is unambiguously the worst thing that they ever did in their whole career, but they were smart enough to not put that on any of the live albums, leaving aside the films. So I'm actually not going to count that against it. And number 20, I've put Blood on the Rooftops. I don't think that this will be a controversial choice to sit as high as it does. I'm generally not one to get too upset about people leaving the band when they did, right? History went the way that it did. We have a whole lot of good music from the trio era. But it does seem unfortunate to me that there wasn't maybe a little bit more of an incorporation of Steve's facility for classical guitar. Now you have Horizons, of course. I already mentioned the acoustic bit at the beginning of After the Ordeal, but the employment of classical acoustic here is just utterly sublime in ways that kind of transcend explanation, but which I think probably will be very obvious to anyone who's watching this video. Now, I'm not totally sure if it would have been Steve or Phil that came up with the vocal melody, but it is really one of the most sublime and elegant vocal melodies of the whole prog era. And the use of mellotron to create atmosphere here, once again, is about as effective as it ever was on any Genesis album. I also personally love the bait and switch of having a title which implies chaos and violence, and then applying it to this piece which is so elegant, so sedate, yet under the surface also very dark and melancholy. All right, so we have 2 videos left to go in the series. Once again, thanks everybody much for your comments, thoughts, and feedback. As always, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out Electric Brain, Electric Shadow on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. Have a good afternoon.